Hello and welcome to English for Philosophy Students, Lessons Online. And we are in the middle of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We are in lesson number 63 of that book. And lesson number 16, I believe, in the 7th rule, which is that you should pursue what is meaningful rather than what is expedient. Last time, we looked at the idea that if you believe in the central tenets of Christianity, it will lead to certain bad consequences. Basically, the central tenets of Christianity, which Nietzsche was referring to and Dostoevsky also referred to, were that Jesus died, here it is, to redeem the world, and that salvation was mainly about heaven, the hereafter, and finally, that you couldn't do anything to get to heaven. Works of righteousness do not contribute to salvation. So those are the three central axioms of Christianity that bring about certain negative results. The negative results are that the value of life on earth became less. So the devaluation of life on earth. And the passive acceptance of the status quo or the prevailing conditions. And finally, and most significantly, the tendency of Christians to reject the moral burden of humanity. To say, I don't have to do anything. Nothing I do is going to change anything here, so I am not responsible to be moral. Dostoevsky, in his book The Brothers Karamazov, also brought forward these arguments, and we read a story in which there was an inquisitor, someone from the Spanish Inquisition, who was speaking to Jesus himself, whom he had imprisoned. And the inquisitor said that the church, in mercy, had lifted the demand for perfection from the followers, offering them instead an escape from moral burden. The escape was faith in Jesus to save them and faith in heaven, an afterlife. So, both Dostoevsky and Nietzsche suggested that faith in Jesus to save us will cause people not to work to improve life on earth. Dostoevsky ended his story a little bit differently than Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a blunt hammer of a philosopher, but Dostoevsky was more sophisticated and more ambiguous. Ambiguous means two meanings. So what I've just said agrees with Nietzsche, but the end of the story has the inquisitor opening the prison door and allowing Jesus to escape into the world, showing that Dostoevsky felt that the spirit of Jesus still conquered the rationalistic attack on Christianity of the Enlightenment. Now, we are going to move forward into some analysis of this story. So let us begin to read. Get some green. The profundity of this story and the greatness of spirit necessary to produce it can hardly be exaggerated. Dostoevsky, one of the great literary geniuses of all time, confronted the most serious existential problems in all his great writings. And he did so courageously, headlong, and heedless of the consequences. Clearly Christian, he nonetheless adamantly refuses to make a straw man of his rationalist and atheistic opponents. Quite the contrary. In the Brothers Karamazov, for example, Dostoevsky's atheist, Ivan, argues against the presuppositions of Christianity with unsurpassable clarity and passion. Alyosha, aligned with the church by temperament and decision, cannot undermine a single one of his brother's arguments, although his faith remains unshakable. Dostoevsky knew and admitted that Christianity had been defeated by the rational faculty, by the intellect even. But, and this is of primary importance, he did not hide from that fact. He didn't attempt, through denial or deceit or even satire, to weaken the position that opposed what he believed to be most true and valuable. He instead placed action above words and addressed the problem successfully. By the novel's end, Dostoevsky has the great embodied moral goodness of Alyosha, the novitiate's courageous imitation of Christ, attain victory over the spectacular but ultimately nihilistic critical intelligence of Ivan. Let's go back to the beginning and see if we can get some meaning out of this. The profundity of this story and the greatness of spirit necessary to produce it can hardly be exaggerated. Let's start with this. Can hardly be exaggerated. To exaggerate something is to make it seem larger or more significant than it is. If something cannot be exaggerated, that means that our perception of it is already so huge that we cannot conceive of it being bigger. This phrase means that the subject of the sentence is infinitely great and significant. So, what is so great and significant? The profundity of the story, for one, and the greatness of spirit necessary to produce it. First, we'll talk about profundity of the story. Jordan Peterson thinks that this story is deep and significant and filled with meaning. This is the kind of story that he has spoken of before as embodying a concept that humanity is evolving toward understanding, but has not fully mastered. When there is some philosophical or spiritual or elevated truth that we as a species don't understand yet well enough to write a treatise on it, we can still embody it in ritual or drama or narrative or art, and people can sense a truth that they could not actually explain. Jordan Peterson believes this story is like that. It is pregnant with meaning, able to give birth to new levels of clarity of moral and spiritual perception. So, the profundity of the story can hardly be exaggerated. So, this is Jordan Peterson's highest praise for the significance and the meaning present in this story. And the greatness of spirit necessary to produce it, it refers to the story. The greatness of spirit of Dostoevsky, a man who can write a story like this, must have a great spirit. Okay, so the greatness of spirit of Dostoevsky can hardly be exaggerated. The guy, the man, the author is a giant. Spiritually and philosophically and metaphysically, he is great in spirit. So, the profundity of this story and the greatness of spirit necessary to produce it. Necessary to produce it means he could never have written such a story if he was not a great man. Can hardly be exaggerated. Dostoevsky, one of the great literary geniuses of all times. When you have commas setting off a phrase, usually it is information about the antecedent. So Dostoevsky, who is one of the great literary geniuses of all time in all of human history. So Dostoevsky confronted the most serious existential problems in all his great writings. And he did so courageously, headlong, and heedless of the consequences. Okay, two ideas here. First, Dostoevsky confronted the most serious existential problems in all of his great writings. So we'll call that this one. In this particular paragraph, we are talking about the problems of Christianity. And the existential problem, the problem that was experienced after the Enlightenment, was that man could no longer believe in Christianity. That was an existential problem. And Dostoevsky, and also that believing in it was thought to be negative. Another existential problem. So Dostoevsky confronted these problems in all of his writings, all of his great writings. So this is saying that all of Dostoevsky's great novels are filled with a bold confrontation or bold examination of the most serious problems of his day. And he did so courageously. So did so, we'll go here to this, did so, meaning he confronted them courageously. People are afraid to look at the most serious existential problems. It is easier to close your eyes to it. But Dostoevsky looked at it with courage. Headlong. So headlong refers to not being cautious. Just throw yourself out there without any plan to save yourself if anything is wrong. So he looks at these problems knowing that they might undermine what is most meaningful to him. He doesn't protect himself in any way. He jumps in headlong and heedless of consequences. Heedless of consequences is another way of saying headlong. Headlong is imagery. It suggests jumping off a cliff, even diving headfirst. And then, of course, you are not paying attention to consequences or negative consequences, dangers to yourself. So this sentence means that Dostoevsky, who was one of the greatest geniuses of our time, always looked at these problems with no hesitation. Okay? Clearly Christian, he nonetheless adamantly refuses to make a straw man of his rationalist and atheistic opponents. Okay, so this is support for the previous sentence. He just said he confronts the problems headlong, and now he says, even though he is definitely a Christian, that's what clearly Christian, comma, means. He is a Christian. In spite of the fact that he is a Christian, he nonetheless adamantly refuses to make a straw man of his rationalist atheistic opponents. So even though he is a Christian, he doesn't try to weaken or undermine the arguments of the rationalists who would destroy Christianity. So he doesn't try to handicap those arguments to make them easier to overcome. Quite the contrary. So he does the exact opposite of trying to straw man those arguments or make them appear weak. In the Brothers Karamazov, for example, Dostoevsky's, atheist Ivan argues against the presuppositions of Christianity. So rather than Dostoevsky trying to make atheists look stupid and weak, he makes his strongest character an atheist, a sharp rationalist. He makes him strong. And Ivan, the strong atheist, argues against the presuppositions of Christianity with unsurpassable clarity and passion. So Dostoevsky gives all of his genius to crafting a character who can attack Christianity with passion and mental clarity. So this is the opposite of making atheism into a straw man. So even though Dostoevsky himself is a Christian, he still writes all of his power into the atheist character. Alosha, who is, by the way, the Christian character, aligned with the church by temperament and decision. So Alosha, who is aligned with the church, which means he is a Christian, by temperament, meaning he is his character, his preferences go along with the church, as well as decision, aligned by decision, means he has made a profession and committed himself to the church. So Alosha cannot undermine a single one of his brother's arguments. So Alosha is shown to be weak in rationalistic defense against the atheism that seeks to destroy Christianity. So he cannot undermine, he cannot defeat in any way a single one, not one, of his brother's arguments. His brother is 100% victorious in debate over Alosha, showing that the existential problem of rationalist defeat of Christianity in Dostoevsky's day was in fact unsurpassed. The rationalistic argument won the day. Dostoevsky was showing that rationalism had defeated Christianity in this. However, although Alosha's faith remains unshakable. So this shows that in spite of the rationalistic defeat of Christianity, Christians remain faithful. This is part of the ambiguity of Dostoevsky's message. He is not like Nietzsche. Nietzsche is destroying Christianity and declaring God dead, whereas Dostoevsky leaves God really victorious, brightly victorious in his novels, although they're deep and sophisticated and full of what we call food for thought. Dostoevsky knew and admitted that Christianity had been defeated by the rational faculty. So, Dostoevsky knew Christianity was defeated, and he admitted it. So he did not try to hide the fact that Christianity had been defeated by the rational faculty, by the intellect even. But, and this is of primary importance, so what's coming is of primary importance. This will be of primary importance, but he did not hide from the fact. So Dostoevsky knew and admitted that Christianity was defeated, but he did not hide from that fact. He didn't attempt through denial or deceit, that's lying, or even satire, to weaken the position that opposed what he believed to be most true and valuable. Dostoevsky did not attempt to make a straw man out of rationalism and then knock it down. Dostoevsky admitted and allowed that rationalism had defeated it. Instead, Dostoevsky placed action above words and addressed the problem successfully. Sometimes when I am in debate with someone who disagrees with me, and I cannot defeat them in argument, yet they do not change my mind, I point out examples of the way my philosophy actually works. For example, I was discussing with a friend about whether God does miracles in our day. And this friend was saying, no, miracles were something that God did back in the Bible days, when Jesus was around. But as soon as the canon of the Bible was closed and was set, the revelation of God was complete, and there was no more need for miracles and for prophecy and tongues and words of wisdom and healings and all this. This was his argument. And I just said, but miracles do happen, and started listing examples that I've seen and saying, how do you account for this? And his theology had no answer. And this is what Dostoevsky is doing. He is allowing the arguments of the rationalists to stand, but writing godly character into his Christian Alosha, and showing how that godliness actually overcomes the weakness, the character weakness, the brittle nihilism, the fragile nihilism of the atheist character. So he puts action above words. And this addresses the problem successfully. Basically, what he is saying is, your argument wins, but your argument does not describe reality. Therefore, your argument is clearly wrong. Even though we cannot say why it's wrong, we know it is wrong because it does not describe reality. And it goes back again to this idea Jordan Peterson said earlier, that the human race is evolving psychologically and spiritually toward greater and greater appreciation of what is truly meaningful. And there is a frontier where we are questing to get above it, and we don't have full understanding, but we have a sense of it, enough to put into art and narrative and poetry and ritual. So Dostoevsky is saying, yes, we have this problem, but the answer is not to throw out Christianity in favor of nihilism. That's definitely a wrong idea. We must find a way to understand what is meaningful above the level of the argument that we have control of today. So Dostoevsky overcomes the rationalist objection not through rationalistic argument, but through demonstrated goodness of character. So by the novel's end, Dostoevsky, so by the end means when you have gotten to the end, Dostoevsky has the great embodied moral goodness of Alosha attained victory over the spectacular but ultimately nihilist critical intelligence of Ivan. So the great embodied moral goodness. Embodied means you've got this moral goodness and you've got a human being who clothes it in flesh, who embodies it, just like Jesus said, "Be ye perfect as I am perfect." Jesus incarnated God's Spirit, Then he gave God's Spirit to his followers so that they could incarnate God's Spirit in the world. The church, it is claimed, has removed the moral burden of being perfect by presenting escapist notions of faith and the afterlife. But somehow the system still works to create little Christs, people who enflesh Jesus, people who embody the Spirit of Jesus, people who do not give up morality, sit passively and allow the world to fall apart, and only look to heaven and not earth. That is not characteristic of profound Christians. So what this does is it shows that even though there is a problem, logically and rationally, there is still meaning. We have a phrase in English: don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Take that which is meaningful out of the worthless, dirty water. Throw away that which is useless, but keep that which is precious. And here it's suggesting that there is still something meaningful and precious within Christianity that is needs to be salvaged when you strip away that which is worthless. Okay, let us continue. Hold on. I'm going to get myself a new color. All right. The Christian church described by the Grand Inquisitor is the same church pilloried by Nietzsche. Childish, sanctimonious, patriarchal, servant of the state. That church is everything rotten, still objected to by modern critics of Christianity. Nietzsche, for all his brilliance, allows himself anger, but does not perhaps sufficiently temper it with judgment. This is where Dostoevsky truly transcends Nietzsche, in my estimation, where Dostoevsky's great literature transcends Nietzsche's mere philosophy. The Russian writer's Inquisitor is the genuine article in every sense. He is an opportunistic, cynical, manipulative, and cruel interrogator, willing to persecute heretics, even to torture and kill them. He is the purveyor of a dogma he knows to be false. But Dostoevsky has Christ, the archetypical perfect man. Kiss him anyway. Equally importantly, in the aftermath of the kiss, the Grand Inquisitor leaves the door ajar so Christ can escape his pending execution. Dostoevsky saw that the great, corrupt edifice of Christianity still managed to make room for the spirit of its founder. That's the gratitude of a wise and profound soul for the enduring wisdom of the West, despite its faults. Let's go back. So it seems to me that this paragraph is more or less a comparison of Nietzsche's treatment of the problem and Dostoevsky's treatment of the problem. The problem being that rationalistic thought and developed intellect could no longer believe in Christianity. Christian church described by the Grand Inquisitor is the same church pilloried by Nietzsche. Okay, so pilloried means pretty much shamed and destroyed. Shame and destruction. In the olden days, when they would pillory a person, they would chain them to a pillar in the middle of the public square, where they would be exposed to public humiliation. Children would throw rocks at them and spit at them and yell and scream and laugh at them. And adults would spit on them and strike them. And eventually, they would be punished and often killed. This was a terrible punishment. So it says Nietzsche is pillorying the church, and it is the same church that is being described by the Grand Inquisitor. The sense of this sentence is that Dostoevsky and Nietzsche are both looking at the same reality, the same institution of the church. They are seeing it with all the same faults. It's not that Dostoevsky saw a better version of the church than Nietzsche. They each saw the same flawed institution. And then they go on to say what's wrong with it. The church is full of people who are childish. We have in English two words. One is childlike, the other is childish. To be childlike is positive. It means innocent and trusting and good and loving and sweet. All of these are the characteristics of being childlike. Childish is negative. It's the negative characteristics of small children. Childish means throwing tantrums, hitting people, being selfish and greedy and taking things for yourself, and screaming if you don't get your way right now. All of that is childish. And also irrational and stupid and demanding things that are not good. Childish. So it is bad to be childish. Sanctimonious. This means believing yourself to be morally good and morally better than other people. You are turning up your nose at others, believing yourself to be morally superior. To be sanctimonious is a very unattractive trait. Very off-putting, very negative. Blech. Sanctimonious, patriarchal. By the way, sanctimonious is a good word to describe the left right now. They believe themselves to be morally superior to all of the right-wing people, and then they come and yell at you in the public place. That's sanctimonious. Patriarchal, so obviously men are in charge, not women. Servant of the state. You know what that means, and it is becoming more and more scary in America. I myself have trouble attending a church that is not resisting the government in America right now with respect to the COVID coronavirus restrictions. The government has essentially made church almost illegal in America in many places by insisting that, number one, everyone must wear masks, including down to children 2 years old and up, but also that you cannot meet with more than a very small number of people, maybe 10 or 12 or 25. We're talking churches that will accommodate thousands of people, 25 in the huge auditorium. The government is attempting to destroy church in America in some places using coronavirus as its pretext. And when the pastors submit to it and enforce it, I lose respect. I think that the church has become the servant of the state. So that church is everything rotten, still objected to by modern critics of Christianity. So nothing has really changed. Modern atheists still say that the church is childish, sanctimonious, patriarchal, servant of the state, and everything rotten. Well, so both Nietzsche and Dostoevsky are looking at the same institutional failings. Nietzsche, for all his brilliance, allows himself anger. So this phrase, for all his brilliance, is a concession statement, because really the sentence is Nietzsche allows himself anger, which is a criticism of Nietzsche. Nietzsche should not be allowing anger to cloud his reason. So this, for all his brilliance, is a concession. Nietzsche is a brilliant man, but unlike most brilliant men, he allows himself to be angry. He gives himself the privilege or the indulgence of anger, but does not perhaps sufficiently temper it with judgment. Okay, so Nietzsche allows himself anger, but does not temper it with judgment. So he is allowing himself to be too angry to be fair. His anger is taking precedence over his intellectual judgment, in spite of the fact that he is brilliant. Okay, so Nietzsche is allowing his judgment to be damaged by anger. This is where Dostoevsky transcends Nietzsche. Okay? So Dostoevsky truly transcends Nietzsche in my estimation. So Jordan Peterson thinks that Dostoevsky has the more correct view of the problem. So in this anger with Christianity of Nietzsche is his weakness. And Dostoevsky transcends him because Dostoevsky comes at the problems of Christianity with love, not with anger. So this is where Dostoevsky's great literature transcends Nietzsche's mere philosophy. Great literature. So Dostoevsky's great literature contains superior philosophical content than Nietzsche's mere philosophy. Dostoevsky's literature has more than just philosophy. The Russian writer is Dostoevsky. So Dostoevsky's Inquisitor is the genuine article. So the Inquisitor is the genuine article in every sense. He's pointing out that it's not a straw man. The Inquisitor is not artificially weak so that he can be overcome. No, he is the embodiment of the strong attack of rationalism on Christianity. The Inquisitor is an opportunistic, cynical, he is all these things, manipulative, and a cruel interrogator, willing to persecute heretics and even to torture and kill them. So all of these are the characteristics of the Inquisitor, showing that Dostoevsky was not pulling his punches. When you pull your punch, you are not hitting hard. No, Dostoevsky wrote the strongest attack he could on Christianity from a rationalist perspective. This Inquisitor is the purveyor of a dogma he knows to be false. So it's not like he's a dupe. This Inquisitor is a hypocrite and cynical in the sense that he knows he is doing something evil and he's doing it anyway. Well, I'm sorry. But Dostoevsky has Christ, the archetypical perfect man, kiss him anyway. So Christ loves the Inquisitor. Christ's love is greater than the Inquisitor's evil badness, I guess. Equally importantly, in the aftermath of the kiss, the Grand Inquisitor leaves the door ajar so Christ can escape his pending execution. So the two ways that Dostoevsky demonstrates the primacy of Christian character over rationalist attack. Number one, the fact that the Christ figure still loved the Inquisitor. And number two, the fact that the Inquisitor was so overcome by this that he admitted defeat and left the door open. Both of these images show the defeat of the Inquisitor at the hands of the Christ. Dostoevsky saw that the great corrupt edifice of Christianity still managed to make room for the spirit of its founder. So this is showing not that the Inquisitor himself is being defeated only, but the Inquisitor is a representative of evil Christianity. Christianity itself is not dead. So Dostoevsky shows that even though Christianity is defeated from a standpoint of rational argument, it is not defeated completely. It still allows room somewhere for the Spirit of Christ. That is the gratitude of a wise and profound soul for the enduring wisdom of the West, despite its faults. So I'm going to highlight that in yellow. The difference between Nietzsche and Dostoevsky is gratitude for the wisdom of the West. It's like Nietzsche has forgotten the debt his own rationalist heritage bears to Christianity. But Dostoevsky has not forgotten that rationalism itself is an outgrowth of Christianity. I used to live in a house that had a very beautiful tree. It was a dogwood tree. And one day, that dogwood tree got split. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was struck by lightning. I think that might have been it. Anyway, or maybe it was blown over by a storm. But anyway, half of the tree was laying flat on the ground like this, still connected to the trunk. The other half of the tree was broken off and fallen over. So I can't do it with my hands, but it was broken off. My husband sawed off the dead half and left the living half laying down on the ground. And in time, the living half, it had branches that were sticking up like this. The branches that were laying on the ground all died, but the branches that were sticking up lived. And the trunk of the tree actually put down roots. And we ended up with effectively 3 dogwood trees coming off that one trunk that was laying on the ground, that was ultimately attached to roots here, but also it made new roots here and here and here. These trees that went up, 3 different trees. It looked like 3 trees, but they were actually 3 branches of one tree that had fallen over and it had lived. I think the branches moving up were like this rationalism that is growing out of the tree of Christianity. And it has forgotten that it is connected to the tree. And if it's denying the tree that it itself is still attached to. So Nietzsche would be one of those trees and Dostoevsky another. Dostoevsky is better because he acknowledges his debt and gratitude toward the wisdom of the West for bringing him to the place where he can even see the weaknesses of the institution of the church. Okay, so that is enough for today. We'll stop here and pick it up again next time. See you later.